in the following months will address ADB's natural capital assessment work in the 5 developing member countries that we undertook in the last several months. Just to set a context and introduce this project, uh, we really started looking at nature very seriously a few years ago, given its importance and its integral linkages to sustainable development. And as now is more and more widely known, ecosystems provide various services to people, and which eventually determine human well-being. And the need for integrating nature and all its aspects into economic and policy decision making is now very well understood. So the mechanisms that really help to integrate these and to raise the necessary resources for investing in nature, these are a very critical component now of most, if not all, projects that ADB undertakes. Uh, so this three-piece project, or what we call People, Planet, Prosperity project, uh, this was undertaken by Stanford's Natural Capital project team, which Mary here leads, along with three MDBs, ADB, IDB, and World Bank, under a Jeff-supported project. And under this, ADB undertook assessments in 5 countries. ADB also supported this through its own technical assistance project. And this project team then undertook assessments as well as capacity building work in these 5 countries, which were namely Armenia, Cook Islands, the People's Republic of China, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. Uh, and we work together with local government partners, local experts, other local stakeholders, in order to define, the specific issue that we would address in the context, uh, and to then use the work that we do to inform policy or finance decisions over a period of time. So the project team, so we have undertaken this work as I mentioned, and we will be disseminating what we did over this webinar and the next 3. The project team is, at the end of it all, also trying to develop a standardized framework under which there would be a set training curricula and some customizable tools, which would help to carry on these natural capital approaches and show how policy and finance interventions could be done using these tools. So without much ado, and with that, let me go on to the main agenda of today. I would first like to invite our Executive Director, ED Justine Sikat, uh, to deliver a few opening remarks. Just a few words of introduction. As was already mentioned, she's a member of ADB's board. She represents 7 countries. And before joining ADB, she has been part of Philippine government policy think tank, Philippine Institute for Development Studies. And as she mentioned, she has strong interest and academic and professional experience in public sector economics and political economy. So ED Justin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Narayan, for the kind words. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this important webinar series on natural capital approaches. We are grateful to have such a distinguished audience today, including policymakers, financial and development institutions, technical experts, and other key stakeholders who are committed to integrating nature's value into policy and investment decisions. Natural capital is vital for long-term food, water, and nutrition security, poverty alleviation, as well as achievement of various sustainable development goals depend upon nature. Yet, despite growing awareness, the invaluable benefits nature provides are still not fully incorporated into economic and policy decisions. Bridging this gap requires collective action from development professionals, researchers, policymakers, and investors. Establishing systems that embed natural capital considerations into policy and financial structures is not merely advantageous, it is necessary for long term human and environmental well being. I am delighted to note that the Asian Development Bank has been working diligently to address this gap. By partnering with Stanford University's Natural Capital Project, we have been able to co develop and pilot natural capital approaches in 5 Asia Pacific countries: Armenia, the People's Republic of China, the Cook Islands, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. Our ultimate goal is to help secure each country's natural capital in a way that directly supports their broader development ambitions. Today's webinar, which is part of a three-part series, will focus on sharing key learnings from the Philippines and Sri Lanka pilots. These projects exemplify how natural capital assessments can inform critical policy and investment decisions in diverse contexts. Mainstreaming natural capital investments can minimize economic risks related to resource depletion, pollution, and natural disasters, while ensuring long term productivity in sectors such as agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. It can also improve public health and the general quality of life. The path ahead is promising. ADB is actively working to institutionalize natural capital assessments as a crucial upstream component of planning, policy, and investment frameworks. By developing operational support and financing mechanisms, we hope to embed natural capital considerations across a broad spectrum of development activities. With that, I wish you all a productive and engaging discussion today. Let us use this opportunity to learn from each other, strengthen our collective efforts, and move closer toward a future where nature's value is fully recognized and integrated into development planning and investment. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Edie Justin, for those really encouraging words, and they mean a lot to the NCL team and the project. And we hope to carry on in the same tone as what you just mentioned. So, with that, may I invite Qingfeng Zhang, who is a Senior Director for the Agriculture, Food, Nature, Rural Development Sector Group within ADB. Qingfeng has long years of leadership and experience, and in many ways can be termed as the architect of the Natural Capital Lab and its work. Over to you, Qingfeng.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Naria. Also, I take this opportunity also thanks ED Chastity. I use his her special time to join us for today's discussions. Again, today's webinar series come very timely since our new president, Kanda-san, just visited one of the great project sites is as ADB supported Jiangsu Yancheng Wetland project in PRC. That project supports a refugee for endangered migratory birds, which is over years combined the natural capital accounting, sustainable financing, and also the integrated livelihood and the ecosystem management. So as a result, that great efforts for many years, that project now is recognized as a UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site. During the president's visit to the Jiangsu Yancheng project last week, President Kanda-san commended the project and also the ADB approach as a model for the natural positive development, conserving the biodiversity, where also driving the economic growth and through the ecotourism, and also directly benefiting their communities. So the reason I started with is President's Kanda-san visit, because that is a foundation for the ADB together with the Stanford University launch this Asia Pacific Natural Capital Lab in 2021. So the purpose of this Natural Capital Lab is to incubate, accelerate the natural capital investments through the better accounting, equal compensation or payment ecosystem services schemes, and the regulatory reforms. So far, we already secured $50 million in blended financing for natural capital fund, And also now is developing their digital natural market platform. So work together with this three-piece project, we also have already initiated the pilot natural capital accounting efforts in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Cook Island, Armenia, and also, of course, is the Yangtze River in the PRC. Today's session, of course, we're going to focus on lessons from the Philippines and also Sri Lanka pilots, where the natural capital approach have been informed the policy and investment strategies. In the Philippines, our working Senator Thomas Warshirt has advanced the ecosystem services variations, where also in Sri Lanka, we are optimized land use in the Mahawani worship that also paved the way for the financial innovations like the green bonds and also carbon credits. Again, this is just a beginning. Scaling up these efforts requires greater corporations. This webinar series provides a platform for the sharing the knowledge, refining the strategy, and also inspiring our future actions. Again, I still take the one of the key comments from our President Kanasan visit to the Jiangsu Yancheng project. Why he comment is the ADB's natural capital investment is can protect the natural planet and at the same time also can support the economic growth. So this is a win-win approach for refining our future approach for the natural capital and also the conservation. I want to take this opportunity to also encourage you to actively engage in today's discussions. And let's explore how we can further integrate the natural capital thinking into the policies and the investments that can benefit both people and also nature. Thank you again for your participation and look forward to the productive and insightful actions. Thank you so much. So over back to you, Naria.
Thank you, Feng, and thanks for laying out so beautifully the continuing efforts that we are making towards natural capital investments and also the linkages with the recent visit that you and President Kanda had to PRC. May I now invite Mary Ruckelshaus, who is the Executive Director of the Natural Capital Project at Stanford University, to deliver a few opening remarks as well. Mary oversees all of natural capital projects, partnerships, including strategy, coordination, fundraising, communications, hiring. She has a very illustrious track record in this area. She serves on several eminent boards, and she essentially is the heart and soul of the Natural Capital Project at Stanford. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Narayan, and also to Justine and Jingfeng for your really wonderful welcoming remarks. I'm going to share just a few slides to provide a little context for why NatCap, as we call ourselves, feels so honored and excited to be part of this collaboration. So Kim, if you could share those, that'd be great. The main thing I wanted to share is the NatCap is 20 years old this year. And the main thing on this first slide that I just wanted to emphasize is that what we've been doing for 20 years is to really integrate natural capital information into decisions, into finance and policy decisions. Next slide, please. And the main thing that we've learned over our 20 years, our partners are at the bottom of the slide. We're a network of over 400 institutions now, is that as we've learned, we've been invited in working in different countries, that it's very possible, even 20 years ago, but much more so now, to take existing information on the values of nature and connect them to human well-being metrics, like livelihoods, like monetary values, and many others, And what we're really excited about, next slide, please, with this project is that we've realized over time that the best way to mainstream these approaches is to collaborate with multilateral development banks and other international financial institutions such as the ADB. So our approach, we call it an 80-20 rule, and you'll hear this from some of the NatCap colleagues later today, is really about engagement and understanding what leaders in policy and finance need and communities, and then what their priorities are, and then we can help develop scenarios and look at trade-offs, and often win-wins. If you protect or restore nature, you can build greater resilience in livelihoods and economies. Next slide, please. So as we've learned through this wonderful portfolio that, as Narayan said, ADB plus the World Bank plus Inter-American Development Bank, we ended up looking at 16 countries as a portfolio, as a group, and asked how can we support each of those countries to get started in implementing natural capital approaches. So we'll hear a deep dive today from Philippines and Sri Lanka cases, but there are 14 others, and you can see the diversity of policy contexts and investment contexts in which these countries are teaching us, and ADB is teaching us all together how can we get these innovative ideas implemented and really moving. And I think I have one more slide, or maybe two. Okay, yeah, this is just to emphasize, this is all of us together at Stanford last spring, how important it is, these webinars like today, but also to get together in person to share the innovations that are happening, share lessons peer-to-peer across development agencies, across financial institutions, and across governments and communities, what's working and what are the ongoing challenges, so we can really just help each other build this capacity and have these approaches take off. And then last but not least, yeah, is just the picture on the globe of where the countries are that are in this group of 16 nations. And we'll hear about 2 tonight or this morning. And we're really excited to keep innovating and helping each other. So thank you for your attention. And I'm really interested to hear more details from the 2 pilots we're going to highlight tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was a really good overview of what the Natural Capital Project does and this project as well. And we're really excited to continue to work with the Natural Capital Project in the future as well. But thanks a lot for all the support so far. I would now like to invite Director Lormelin Claudio of the CSO and DNR to deliver a keynote speech. Director Claudio currently serves as the Director of the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Government of Philippines. She has had numerous leadership positions in the past across regions within the Environment Management Bureau. And she is a very distinguished scholar as well as an academic in the past. Director Claudio, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to again, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank.
We can hear you. We can hear you, Director. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much, especially to Mr. Shangfang Zhang. I hope I pronounce it right, sir, the Senior Director of the Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development of the sector under ADB. And of course, we heard from Ma'am Justine Sikat and from Mary Raquel Soas as well. And those who are joining us online, a pleasant afternoon to everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to join you today at this Natural Capital webinar organized by the Asian Development Bank and Stanford University's Natural Capital Project. This event is a valuable opportunity to highlight the role of natural capital assessment and accounting in shaping sustainable policies and investments, particularly as the Philippines moves towards institutionalizing these approaches. Before we dive into today's discussions, let me provide some background on the Santo Tomas watershed in Zambales, the focus of our pilot project. Zambales is a province with a unique ecological and socioeconomic landscape, one that has been significantly shaped by natural events, particularly the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. The lahar flows that followed altered land cover, affected water resources, and reshaped local livelihoods. Understanding these landscape changes and the ecosystem services provided by the watershed has been the central work undertaken by the ADB, the Stanford University, and the DNR in this project. This is the Santo Tomas watershed. This is located in the northern part of the country. And as you can see here, there's this Mapanuepe Lake, there's the abandoned mining site, and Mount Pinatubo at the upstream. So let me discuss a bit on the Philippine Ecosystems and Natural Capital Accounting, which is the PENCAST Act, and signed into law just last year, last 22 May 2024. This law supports economic, environmental, and health policy development. It aims as well to establish a system for natural capital accounting, integrate natural capital into macroeconomic indicators, and provide tools for ecosystem protection, conservation, restoration, and enable valuation of ecosystem services. In this law, we have the key players for the institutional arrangements. We have the Philippine Statistics Authority Board, which is tasked to oversee the implementation of the law. We have here as well the interagency committees under the PSA to develop methodologies and address technical concerns. And of course, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, which should provide the environmental data needed. And other government agencies needed to collaborate on data collection and policy integration. So as shown here, since the time that the law was passed, there had been many activities undertaken already by the DNR and by the other agencies. We aim to come up with the implementing rules and regulations soon. I want to express my sincere appreciation to ADB, the Stanford University, and all our partners for their invaluable support in advancing this initiative. let me say a bit about the PENCAS. The Philippines had already this statistics law since 2013, but the PENCAS law would give us insights, would give us the roadmap in coming up with the valuation of our resources. And that is why the DNR plays a major role here. The Ecosystem Research and Development Bureau, which is the research arm of the DNR, or we may say it's a think tank of the DNR, is working much on to complement the efforts of this technical working group, because under the PENCAS, we have the steering committee under the DNR, and we have the technical working group. And so later, Ms. Abigail Bautista, my colleague here, would provide the status on the pilot project done by the ADB and the Stanford University and the DNR in Santo Tomas River. We would like to again, I want to express my sincere appreciation to ADB, the Stanford University, and all our partners for their invaluable support in advancing this initiative. I also commend my colleagues at the ERDB and DNR for their dedication to strengthening the role of science and data-driven policymaking in natural resources management. Earlier, while I was talking with Sir Narayan Iyer, I updated him on what the team had done recently, and I was sharing with him that in the most recent workshop that the ADB had done with the DNR, we pointed out that there has to be a need to expand on the activities. Like, for example, as I have shown early on, that the project area, the pilot area, is located in an area where dredging operations is or prevail. And earlier as well with the meeting briefly with Mr. Martin Pelly, we talked about why watershed, and I told him that the ERDB has come up with a study recently on the water balance estimation in a watershed. And this is something new to the DNR that would pave way also for water pricing, which we will be working on. And the DNR at this point is working on the review and evaluation of the ENR framework and coming up with a new one that would cover 2025 to 2040. So in that framework, what has been emphasized is the approach on integrated ecosystems management, and in which the PENCAS, the natural capital accounting, would play a big role. And the DNR and partners, the agencies, would be working much on it. And so we are so thankful at the DNR, actually, to ADB for the assistance that you are providing, and hopefully you will provide more, because us from the DNR, especially the Ecosystems Research Development Bureau, we also are pursuing on the data management, and in fact, with the integration of artificial intelligence insights and approaches with GIS integration. So it's gonna be a big task, and that would require definitely assistance and collaboration with partners and all entities. So again, thank you so much for having me here, and I look forward to meeting you soon, Mr. Narayan Iyer, and even hopefully Sir Xingfang Zhang, so that we would be able to discuss more on ways forward for ensuring that the projects, as we have conceptualized, would be very relevant, and all outputs. Let me say this: our secretary, Maria Antonia Yuloloy Saga, always says that whatever we do, we should do it with relevance, with rigor, and with timeliness. And we hope this project would all provide that. Okay, thank you again, and let's have a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Director Claudio, for that, for those wonderful words. Actually, we are here as a multilateral development bank to support all our DMCs, and we would absolutely like to continue to do the work that we started. It's what you explained about the PENCAS is actually so exciting. It's difficult to explain that in words. It is the kind of thing that we would like to see across DMCs. This PENCAS is really a milestone that will take forward Philippines, enormously. And we are very happy to be part of that journey. So let's, in the same spirit, delve deeper into the pilot assessment that we carried out in the Philippines. And let me first request Jess Silver of the Natural Capital Project to introduce the project and explain more about the work that we did there. Jess is an ecosystem services analyst for the Natural Capital Project's marine team. And her focus is on applying and supporting the development of invest coastal protection tools. She's a very, very experienced and brilliant analyst. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you, Narayan. And thank you for that great keynote speech, Director Claudio. That was really a pleasure to listen to. I'm going to give a short introduction to what we have been focusing on in this pilot for the 3Ps project in the Philippines. I'll speak first, and then colleagues from ADB and the DENR will also add. This is a very highly collaborative pilot. Okay, you can advance the slide, Kim. You can advance it to the next one. So there were two key focuses of this particular pilot project. The bulk of the work, and what I'm going to spend the most time talking about, is the first focus of the pilot project was this work with the DENR and the ADB, as well as a local environmental economics consulting group in the Philippines. And it was focused on thinking about the ways in which we can use ecosystem service assessments and valuation to enhance watershed management planning. And so this is a project that is actually built into a much larger project that DENR had kicked off. And so this is summarizing what we've done in about a year of working together on this. And then the second thrust of work as part of the pilot, which I will touch on briefly, was a rapid assessment of tourism visitation and expenditures to regional flyway sites in the Philippines. And this was work that was completed in a much shorter time frame at the beginning of the pilot. Okay, Kim, go ahead. So I'm going to speak first about the watershed management planning pilot. And really the focus of the pilot was on capacity building within DENR to apply these approaches to watershed management planning questions. So the goal of our collaboration was for Stanford and for ADB to really try and work with DENR to provide in-depth training on a number of different topics, which included tools and approaches for ecosystem service assessments, for valuation, and then for accounting in the UNCF framework. This was also coupled with putting together documentation. So colleagues from DENR will talk more about this, but part of the effort is to update some of the standard operating procedures and the manuals that exist for developing watershed management plans. So providing training, documentation, and then for really kicking off the process to co-develop a roadmap, if you will, with DENR to think about all the different pathways that these types of approaches can be used to improve watershed management. Okay, go ahead, Kim. So I wanted to break this down by just briefly touching on the key activities and outcomes associated with each of these focus thrusts of work. So in terms of the in-depth training, we co-developed with DENR a training model that best fit their needs. So what that looked like for the Stanford team was a series of 7 90-minute trainings held over the period of about 10 months that really focused on capacity development in about 30 regional, so central and regional offices, DENR staff, focusing on ecosystem service assessment using the INVEST modeling suite. I think one of the key outcomes of this, and a relatively ambitious and novel outcome for me in many years of training people, was that DENR staff did all the analysis, ran all the models, and they are the ones that have produced the baseline assessments for 3 key watershed ecosystem services. Similarly, the ADB economists, along with a local consulting group, have provided a number of very in-depth workshops and site visits focused on ecosystem service valuation. So taking the information from the assessment, applying valuation approaches to these services, and then putting this into an accounting framework. Similarly, DENR has performed a number of important components of this work, including facilitating stakeholder engagements independently. Okay, go ahead. So as I said, we have been very diligent to provide not only capacity development training, but also to think about types of documentation that will be necessary for replicating these workflows and approaches in other watersheds. So we worked with DENR and continue to work with DENR to make sure that we are co-producing information so that manuals can be updated and appropriate guidance can be provided. And I think one important outcome of that is that DENR is currently starting to apply similar approaches in a second watershed. So being able to transfer methodologies from one place to another. All right, thanks, Kim. And so the last bucket of work, and one of the most critical, of course, is to thinking about how these approaches can really help to advance the science and practice of watershed management. So this is this policy mapping opportunity to think about how we can use information from assessments and accounting frameworks to ultimately inform policy. And that one of the buckets of work that is closing out the pilot project is a final workshop that's being scheduled right now with ADB and consultancy and DENR to really focus on this last component. And this will include going back to the pilot watershed and presenting the results to stakeholders, soliciting feedbacks, and then facilitating a workshop focused on identifying policy priorities and opportunities and thinking about how these can be institutionalized. Okay. So thinking about the pilot, moving beyond the pilot. So really, as Mary said in her introduction, the goal of the pilot was to think about planting, nurturing durable seeds that could continue to grow past the life of a very short pilot project. And so in thinking about that goal and the next steps, here are some takeaways and thoughts that everybody is continuing to work on moving forward. So as I mentioned, there is efforts and initiatives being taken to already try to apply this approach in another watershed and think about how that will feed back into our understanding of how replicable it is. I think this pilot was very useful for both DENR and for the Stanford team in thinking about limitations in the approaches. So there were some data limitations that we ran up against, and DENR has moved forward to essentially institutionalize some sort of instrumentation for empirical data collection under the PNCUS Act. So thinking now about putting in place structures so that empirical data can be collected. On the Stanford side, I think it was a really useful understanding of some of the sort of more difficult technical gaps in applying the ecosystem service assessment tools and thinking about ways that we can provide guidance and additional tools to help lower the barrier for users. And right now we are thinking about what the focus of a phase 2 of this pilot would look like if we were to want to move forward. Okay. Very quickly, there was another sort of early focus of the pilot, and that was an effort to sort of demonstrate an example of what we call a rapid ecosystem service assessment approach by using a model in the INVEST tool suite to inform prioritization of regional flyway initiative sites in the Philippines. I won't talk about what the regional flyway initiative is, but we could talk more about that if that's interesting. So to do this, we used a specific model, an ecosystem service model in the INVEST suite, and this is a model that helps to estimate tourism and visitation across a landscape. So the model helps us understand where people are going on a landscape, what draws them there, and estimate tourism revenues. Go ahead, Kim. And so what we did with this was estimate this information at a national scale, and then we were able to provide specific estimates of visitation and expenditures to the regional flyway sites. So this was an example of being able to do a very rapid ecosystem service assessment that could help understand how you might prioritize specific sites for intervention or conservation. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. That was, of course, as enlightening as it was technical, but kudos to you for explaining it in a simple way. We'll, of course, come back to everyone for questions slightly later in the session. I would now like to request my colleague Martino to take the floor Martino is an applied economist with interest in environment, energy, and development economics. And his work focuses, among many other things, the valuation of nature as well. He's a much published economist working with ADB's economic research team. Over to you, Martino. Martino, you're on mute. Still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes,
Oh.
yes.
All right. Thank you, Narayan.
Thank you.
Introduction. And thank you, everyone who spoke before me. Thank you, Jess, for introducing the pilot. This was a very good introduction. And I have to say, we were very happy to support this pilot from the research department of ADB. And I just want to say that I think, in my view, this was a very successful pilot. I think there was a very good collaboration between Stanford, ADB, and DNR, and a lot of interest from DNR to bringing this work forward. And this resulted in a very successful report that we are finishing now with the write-up, and I invite everyone to go and have a look at once it comes out, because I think there is a lot of things that come out of there and that can be used for the future. So I was asked to speak for 5 minutes about the learning that ADB can take out of this. I think that is very interesting, but I also want to touch very briefly on the results from the monetary valuation of the project. So I'll try to be within the 5 minutes. If I go over, please switch off my mic, because I usually speak too much. So can we move to the next slide? I think the next slide is something that everybody has pointed out. So we piloted natural capital approaches and accounting in the Santo Tomas watershed that you can see there. We already saw the picture before. As Director Claudio said, this is a watershed that is close to Mount Pinatubo. So it's heavily affected by lahar deposit that you can see in the picture. So it made the whole valuation a little bit more challenging, but it's a critical watershed for water, biodiversity, agriculture, livelihoods. There was strong local interest, and some planning processes were already in place. So we hope that this work is going to be extremely useful to revise the integrated watershed management plan. And the goal of that we had was really to provide a spatially explicit, and I will come back often to this notion of spatially explicit policy relevant ecosystem service information with biodiversity values and also monetary values, which facilitated the policy decision. And it was, as I said, a very successful partnership with Stanford NatCap, DNR, and the Economy and Environment Group in the Philippines. So can we go to the next slide? So as Jess pointed out, we focused in agreement with DNR on 3 different services that are provided by the watershed. We focused on water provisioning, especially for agriculture, on sediment retention, and on carbon storage. So let me start. If you can see the 2 pictures at the top, so what they show, we took 2015 and 2020 as a year that we were analyzing. And I have to say, as Jess pointed out, it was the pilot worked really well because Stanford provided a really good training on INVEST to DNR. And then EEG was able to work with DNR to produce all these results. So I think there was a very solid element of capacity building throughout the project. So what you can see in those 2 pictures is the change in land use. And one of the biggest change, if you see the picture on the left, there is a lot of light blue. This was inland water that between 2015 and 2020 disappeared and was replaced by open barren land. And this is one issue that it's very important for the integrated watershed management plan. So the open barren land increased by almost 3,000 hectares within the watershed. So let me come to the main result we had. So when we talk about carbon storage, that number is actually wrong. It should be 25,800 metric tons and not 35, but that's fine. So that was the decline in carbon storage within the watershed that we identified. And this is valued at roughly $1 million US. So it's a pretty big number. And this is we come to this 1 million using a very low value for social cost of carbon, around $42 per metric ton, which is actually below what ADB uses in the valuation of projects. And if you look at the map on the bottom, this shows spatially where this carbon storage declined. And therefore, it offers a very good starting point to decide where to intervene and what are the interventions that we can think of. For water provisioning, I told you this was a second service that we we look into. The water provisioning in the watershed is valued at over $600,000 US. And so again, this number gives us an idea of how much we should be willing to invest to maintain this service. And the interesting thing that we did in the study is that you will have the value changes by barangay. So you will see in which barangay the marginal value of water is higher and in which it's lower. And this can be used to understand where we should protect it more, where there are more, and the higher value could come because there are more industries using it intensively or because there is more water scarcity. And therefore we can think about introducing, for instance, payment for ecosystem services and thinking in which barangay we should ask the industries which use water more intensively to pay into a fund, for instance, to maintain the watershed. And finally, the last service that we investigated was sediment retention. So I don't have a number, but the interesting thing is that if we look at sediment retention across the 2 years, 2015, 2020, in aggregate, the number stayed constant. But when we go deep into the spatial analysis, we see that actually the area shifted around the watershed, and therefore the importance of this spatial heterogeneity to understand where we should go and act. Can we move to the next slide? So ADB takeaways from this pilot, and I think we can summarize them under 3 big headings. And I will start on the top right, and I go back to this value is spatial. So especially if we think about a landscape approach in order to think about how to intervene, well, this spatial heterogeneity of value, it's fundamental, right? This type of valuation really provide a baseline to start discussing from an ADB perspective with the government about where are the priority areas where to intervene. So the spatial element is fundamental, and it can be covered up if we do studies that are too aggregated. And if we move to the left, then valuation enhanced decision-making. So once we have identified these priority areas, it becomes relatively easy to decide where to invest and where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, right? Where the investment are going to be more efficient and are going to contribute the most to conserve and preserve the ecosystem. And finally, the last big takeaway is capacity and collaboration are key, which can seem like a simple takeaway, but I think it's extremely important. And what I mean by this is that you really need to get buy-in at every level. So, ADB and Stanford talked to DNR, but it was important to go all the way down to local government units and the local stakeholder. That everybody needs to be on board and understand why we are doing this exercise and why it is going to be useful. And at the same time, when I talk about collaboration, we saw that, I see the comment. I agree that it sounds easy, but it's not. That's why it's very important to invest in that. And ADB can help doing that. But so when I say collaboration, it's also about data. So when we went in and we tried to run these models with DNR, we noticed that there were data gaps, but actually some of the data gaps were not real data gaps. The data exists within the government, but it's not clear where they are. And I think ADB can play a big role in helping structuring the data, creating data sharing agreement. And one last step that we are doing this valuation is really to try to play with the sensitivity of the monetary valuation with respect of how we calibrate the biophysical parameters to see how much money do we need to invest in collecting new data and how much more precision we get on the monetary values. Can I go to the last slide? So the last slide is how do we move from the pilot to the practice? How do we scale this effort? And I think from an ADB perspective, but when I talk about an ADB perspective, I think the government should have the same perspective. The natural capital assessment should really happen upstream and be the first input into planning. As I said before, it should be the baseline we use to think in terms of a landscape approach to the environment, to ecosystems. This is for a watershed, but we should replicate this for every other ecosystem. And the results, in this case, we can inform the integrated watershed management plan, the comprehensive land use plan, and as I was saying before, payment for ecosystem services. There is a lot of things that we can have much more clarity in thinking about when we see how the value changes spatially. So I think there is a very strong case for integrating this work also in other ADB supported investments. As I was saying, for planning, if you think about country planning, when ADB sits down with a country to think what are the priorities, where we should invest first, having this kind of baseline could be extremely useful. And I hope what we need now is the opportunity to replicate this work in a couple more watersheds to really polish the methodology, come out with a set of capacity buildings for every level, from DNR to the local government unit to stakeholder, that are standardized and we can easily apply in other regions in the Philippines, but then we can also apply in other countries. So, and that is the flow chart that I try to put at the bottom, but we really need, in this case, we had ADB and NetCap, which provided technical support and coordination. But all the work was actually done by DNR and the regional offices. So they co-led the implementation, they looked into data provision and validation. But then we need this work, as Jess was saying, to keep going, and we need to inform the local government unit about how to integrate this into the watershed management plan and how is this policy relevant. And then we need to keep going to the community and the local stakeholders for ground truthing, understanding what are the local priorities, and really make this thing useful. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Martino, for a crisp presentation. Couldn't agree more with you on the fact that valuation is so important, can inform big decisions and small decisions, capacity building, buy-in, and of course, how this is so extremely important in upstream studies to set the tone for projects. We'll come back to you later on in the Q&A. I would now like to invite a colleague from DNR, Abigail Bautista. So Abigail is ERDB. She's a project evaluation officer with DNR, and as ERDB's NCA focal point, she actively works in incorporating natural capital accounting into the Bureau's research programs and data systems, especially in the light of the recently passed PENCAS Act. Abigail, the floor is yours. You have about 8 to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Ryan. Okay, so I'm here to share the reflections and lessons learned from implementing the VANCA project. As one of the project team members, I will present insights from DNR's perspective, highlighting our experiences while working with technical assistance from Natural Capital Project at Stanford and the Asian Development Bank. But before I get into that, let me share with you where and why the project started. Next slide, please. Okay, so back in 2008, nag-e-echo po eh. Nag-e-echo. Can you hear me? Sure.
Yes, we
Okay,
can. We can hear you, Abigail. Please go on.
so back in 2008, ERDB launched a program to develop tools for vulnerability assessment of watersheds as part of the watershed characterization process outlined in our Memorandum Circular number 200805. This DMC outlines the guidelines for preparing integrated watershed management plans or IWMPs for all watersheds in the country, regardless of their classification, size, use, or administrative jurisdiction. So in 2011, this was when the first vulnerability assessment manual was published by ERDB. 2017, the manual was updated to include adaptive capacity, especially in response to climate change. In 2018, the regional offices started using these tools in watershed planning. And in 2019, the Forest Management Bureau issued Technical Bulletin 16A, expanding the approach to include terrestrial and coastal areas. So why am I telling all this history? This is to let you know that the project isn't a one-off activity or initiative. It builds on years of work to improve watershed management. And the directive for this project came from Director Cheryl T. Leal of the Planning and Policy Service during a TWG on NCA meeting in June 2023. Our focus is the Santo Tomas watershed in Zambales, a critical watershed that was severely impacted by 1991 Mount Pinatubo eruption, as discussed earlier by Director Claudio. Next slide, please. So what are we aiming for? The project itself plans to integrate NCA into WCVA, making it or part of watershed assessments. Another objective is to update the BA manual to reflect these enhancements, build capacity among DNR staff and stakeholders to use NCA decision making, and inform policy with evidence-based recommendations to improve watershed management. By the end of the project, we expect to deliver the valuation of ecosystem services in the Santo Tomas watershed and an updated VA manual that incorporates NCA methodologies. Next slide, please. Why is this important? When we conduct the watershed characterization and vulnerability assessment, or WCVA, we get important information about the watershed's biophysical, socioeconomic, and institutional conditions. However, the current WCVA doesn't fully capture the value of the ecosystem services that watersheds provide, things like carbon storage, water provisioning, and even sediment retention. And this is where the VANCA project comes in. So instead of working or creating a whole new system, we're enhancing the existing WCVA by integrating NCA. The same data we already collect, like land use, water resources, socioeconomic conditions, these data can also support NCA with just a few additional steps or perhaps additional parameters. So this means more accurate assessments that highlight the value of our watersheds, helping decision makers make better informed these policies. So let's think of it like upgrading a tool we already know how to use, making it more powerful and efficient. So this WCVA, this is conducted by all the regional and so by improving this manual, the impact will be reflected nationwide. Next slide, please. Now for the key takeaways and challenges, lessons learned. Of course, applying the NCA in watershed assessment wasn't without its challenges. Here are some of the few challenges. First is the technical and data limitations. Reliable high-resolution data is crucial for invest modeling. I often heard GIS specialists say garbage in, garbage out. But in many cases, we had to work with incomplete datasets. So this meant making adjustments using proxy data, field validation, and expert judgments. Another challenge was the capacity gaps. NCA invest modeling have a steep learning curve. Although Jess and Jessie used to tell us that we learned fast. Thank you for that. But while Stanford and the ADB provided excellent training, applying these tools in real-world decision-making takes time. And we realized that capacity building can't be a one-time event. It needs continuous mentoring. So thank you, NatCap team and ADB for all those trainings and workshops. And we look forward to having so many more. And the third challenge should be the policy and institutional barriers. Even with solid modeling results, integrating them into policy requires institutional support and coordination. There are still challenges in bridging the gap between science and policy. But we have some lessons learned. First would be the start small, then scale up, since the Santo Tomas watershed pilot has enabled us to refine the methodologies before applying them to larger areas. Another lesson is that local knowledge is key. Community insights like changes in the water supply after Mount Pinatubo are essential in validating our models. This was especially true when EEG Philippines and the ENR ERDB were discussing the results of the invest modeling. Without having spoken to the community, a lot of the model outputs wouldn't have made sense to us. And third, the documentation is crucial. Next slide, please. This was briefly touched earlier by Director Claudio and Jess, but I just like to provide you with more information. So, as we all know, the challenge in NCA is that we realize overly on the lost and reliable data, but the lack of consistent primary data collection in the Philippines makes it difficult to generate accurate assessments. However, we realize na that the PENCAS Act, the enactment of it, presents a strategic opportunity for the country to shift from reliance on global datasets to generating its own high-quality primary data. But for this transition to be successful, we need coordinated and well-coordinated and supported approach. So to address this, just recently, I think last month, DNR ERDB proposed including provisions in the PENCAS IRR that direct PSA, DNR, and other relevant agencies to establish a national environmental monitoring framework that would ensure, oh, what happened to the slides? So that would ensure that first the
Get them back
installation.
up in just a moment. Yeah, there's a slight technical issue.
Oh, that's okay. I can continue since it's the last slide. Okay, so the recommended provisions for the IRR are there are only four. First is the installation and maintenance of environmental monitoring equipment, including hydrological stations, weather stations, soil and biomass sensors, and remote sensing technology. The second is the identification of missing long-term data sets and the prioritization of efforts to enhance data collection across agencies. Third is the standardization of data collection to ensure uniformity in frequency, formats, and methodologies for environmental statistics and NCA accounts. And the fourth is the regular validation mechanisms to improve the accuracy and reliability of ecosystem and natural resource accounts. As the ENR's principal research arm, ERDB will push for these provisions to prevent the implementation of PENCAS from being hindered by fragmented, inconsistent, and insufficient data. And we believe that including these provisions in the IRR will mandate the development of long-term data sets and secure funding for critical activities. So where do we go from here? The technical assistance from NatCap and ATB has provided us valuable tools, but it's up to us how to cascade them and how to use them effectively. Moving forward, we need to continue building local expertise, strengthen institutional support for integrating NCA into planning, and advocate for evidence-based policies using the insights from this project. My presentation ends here. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Abigail. That was very, very clear from the perspective of Philippines and from PENCAS perspective. It's very interesting, and it actually underscores the importance of policy, right? You very rightly mentioned that PENCAS can trigger a lot of things. It can help you to build a much better local data collection mechanism and base, and eventually help mainstream natural capital accounts. So I hope this serves as a model for other DMCs as well. We will come back to Sanat later, as Sanat will be was presenting ADB perspectives for both the pilots together. So it may be, in the interest of time management as well, it may be better if Sanat comes in and talks about them together. So we'll move on to now the Sri Lanka pilot exercise. And let me, without further ado, invite Professor Buddhi Marambe. Professor Buddhi is a senior professor of crop science at the University of Peradeniya in Sri Lanka. He has long years of experience, over 36, in this department of crop science. His research interests include weed science, climate change, adaptation, and food security. He has been an integral part of this pilot exercise. Over to you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Narayan. Good morning, colleagues from Sri Lanka. And I'm really happy, while thanking Asian Development Bank and the Natural Capital Project of the Stanford University, let me start doing this very short presentation. There'll be a few people taking the baton and run, and Narayan, so I'll be doing only the initial part of this presentation. And this is the way that we had it. We were talking about trying to see how the food security, the energy security, and livelihood can be supported through strategic watershed management, and that's the overall idea. But to let you know where the pilot took place in Sri Lanka, it's important to let everyone know with one slide to show where Sri Lanka is, for example, for people who did not know about it. And it's one of the study sites or the pilot project sites the ADB supported with the help of the Stanford University as well. And coming back to the more detailed versions of where the project site was, I mean, we are in the Indian subcontinent, and more importantly, the highlands of Sri Lanka are at the center. This changed the overall climatology and hydrology of the country. You must be knowing there are about 103 river basins in Sri Lanka. And for a large majority of them, the central highland is the main catchment. Or in other words, this is what we call our water towers of Sri Lanka. So the pilot project targeted these water towers, which is extremely important when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to agriculture, food security, and you name it. This is the key, the heart of the country's the source of water and the catchment. Now, this is the project area that was focused on, and I just want to let you know that it's a crucial area for Sri Lanka's water resources, as I mentioned a while ago as well. So it's in the central part, as you quite correctly see, and more importantly, it's also provides, or in other ways, also the home to the longest river in Sri Lanka, which is called Mahaveli. And this particular project pilot was focused on Upper Mahaveli watershed, but of course, I'll be chipping in later to let you know how far and how we have thought of expanding the project further and moving forward with the outcomes that we have achieved out of things that we did. So this is the approach that was employed in Sri Lanka. And as I told you earlier also, this model segment and its origins in the Upper Mahaveli watershed, as I told you, very important component of Sri Lankan ecosystem. It's the heart of Sri Lanka, I must tell you, with respect to water. That's the important key thing that we all have to keep in mind. And initially, we want to go ahead with a prototype approach because the idea is to prioritize watershed interventions and investment options. We have come through a long way in this aspect, I must tell you. I will try to give you certain lessons learned out of this exercise later. And also, the more important part is to build awareness. That's something, because natural capital, the term natural capital itself was new to many people in this country as we were dealing more with natural resources. But this natural capital approach, bringing that idea into decision-making and actions among key institutions in Sri Lanka through an awareness building program is an important point. And what will be presented later by Kim and her team is again an important activity that took place in Sri Lanka just ended last December, which is the training of trainers, mainly to build technical skills, because our plan is to move along this angle, move along this approach, because we need ecosystem modeling to be done in the future. And one of the best options that were given to us was this training of trainers using the INVEST model, practiced by the Stanford University and many other entities around the world. So just to let you know the key outcomes, because I'm going to stop at this particular slide in terms of time constraints as well. The key outcomes, we have just concentrated on the opportunity and a challenge. I must tell you, the opportunity is very, very clear, because the science-based watershed investment is an important component with respect to country's economy and looking at the natural capital in having a bird's eye view, because it will definitely support the livelihood of local people. But not only that, remember what I told you? We are looking at the watershed of Sri Lanka. It especially supports the downstream irrigation and hydropower infrastructure in our country. Hydropower is one of the key renewable energy sources in our country, and we need to give priority for those aspects when we move forward through our development agenda. The National Planning Department, as well as the External Resource Department of the Ministry of Finance, have been continuously supporting these activities for us to move forward. But though there's an opportunity, the challenge that we identified is the in-country capacity that we have. That is one of the key things that we had to address even before embarking on activities. And that's something that we needed in Sri Lanka, looking at the long-term activities that we have planned. So the challenge was the capacity issues, and we have already embarked on an activity increasing the in-country capacity to incorporate natural capital approaches and also to conduct natural capital assessments. Kim will be chipping in later to let you know the success story that we had, how people got engaged in, how people got involved in, identifying how important, how significant all this activity with respect to countries' overall development. So Narayan, let me stop at this particular point and allow our other colleagues, Lisa and other colleagues, to continue this presentation. And I'm moving out of this sharing, allowing them to share their slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Buddhi, for giving us the introduction about the pilot and its relevance to the Sri Lankan context. I would now like to invite Lisa Mandel to take the floor. Lisa is part of the National Capital Project at Stanford. She is Director of Science Software Integration and a lead scientist with the National Capital Project. And she specifically oversees ecosystem service, data and software, as well as trying to shed light on how land management and infra development affect ecosystem services, social equity, and human health. Lisa has worked with multiple governments, multilateral development banks, NGOs, in her quest to improve understanding of policy and finance. So Lisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narayan, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to be here. I'll be presenting on the technical part of the Sri Lanka pilot, and the work that I'll be presenting was really led by my colleagues Raphael Schmidt and Nadine Tran. So if you are looking for technical details, I may have to point you to them or to others on this group, but will aim to give an overview of the work that we did. Next slide, please. So as Professor Buddhi already explained very well, so I won't repeat too much. The goal of this work was to identify nature-based watershed investments in the upper Mahaweli catchment, the water power of Sri Lanka, and investments that would support downstream irrigation and energy needs and local livelihoods. Next slide, please. So one important issue that we aim to address was that erosion in the upper Maha catchment, when it washes into the river and flows downstream, it compromises downstream water quality and obstructs irrigation and hydropower infrastructure that's needed for water, for food, and energy security. And this is especially an issue as it feeds into that northern irrigation area that is marked on the map. So we wanted to understand where land use interventions such as restoration or improved management practices could be made that would minimize sedimentation of irrigation infrastructure. Again, so that irrigation infrastructure could keep operating and serving crop production. Where these investments could also reduce reservoir storage loss and operation and maintenance costs for the reservoirs and potentially associated hydropower production. And also where could these land use interventions provide co-benefits for upstream agricultural livelihoods, for ecosystems and ecosystem services. Next slide, please. So we developed a three-step approach to be able to begin to address those issues. And this approach aims to answer first, which activities in which locations of the catchment could maximize benefits? And secondly, what is the maximum benefit or suite of benefits that might be possible for a given cost level or given level of investment? So the three steps to this approach were first to select activities and ecosystem services, second to model and the benefits and the costs, and third then to understand the possibilities and trade-offs. And in this pilot, we used an example approach that was a relatively simple one to start, but shows the potential of what can be done here. So in this first phase, in terms of selecting activities and ecosystem services, we wanted to look at where restoration of tea plantations would decrease sediment. And that's in part, we chose that because tea plantations are a major activity in the upper catchment and have been associated with high levels of erosion that cause the downstream problems I just described. So with that choice of an ecosystem service and an activity, we could then use the INVEST models that have been mentioned before to look at erosion and how under either the current scenario or a scenario of restoring tea plantations to natural native vegetation, what the difference was in sediment and erosion. And with that, we also looked at what restoration costs might be, with the potential for those to vary across the landscape. And putting those three pieces together with a tool called Root, we were then able to look at a variety of scenarios of differing levels of restoration costs and differing levels of sediment retention possible to identify a frontier and a variety of options there. And what's cool about this approach is that you can approach it from kind of different angles. So this can be used to look at, for example, for a given level of restoration investment, what amount of sediment reduction could be expected, and where on the landscape would it make sense to invest to reach that level of sediment reduction. Or on the other hand, you could use it to ask the question, if there's a certain targeted level of sediment reduction that we'd like to aim for example, for the benefit of the irrigation infrastructure or the reservoirs, how much would it cost to reach that target? And again, where on the landscape would it make sense to target to get those benefits? Next slide, please. So I'll show some examples here of the results from this initial approach. On the left here is a map showing in different shades of brown how much sediment retention reduction would be possible with restoration in different areas of tea plantation in the catchment. And you can see with that variation in gradient, the brown gradient, that the benefits are not the same everywhere. There are certain places where restoration would really do more to reduce erosion and sediment downstream than others. On the right is the map of estimated restoration costs. And again, you can see that that's not uniform across the landscape either. There are some places where restoring tea plantation would cost more than others. So how do you put these two pieces together to understand where it might make sense to restore target restoration. Next slide, please. And this is then putting those pieces together. And again, this is just the first implementation of this. So I think we'll talk in lessons learned from Budi and others about where to go from here. But in this first implementation, you can see all the way on the left, if there's no restoration, there'll be no improvement in erosion. All the way to the right of full restoration and the maximum amount of erosion reduction possible. And then many options in between and for what kind of erosion reduction might be possible with restoration, and information for along each of these points on which areas to target to yield those benefits. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, this approach that we developed showed how natural capital assessments can identify and prioritize watershed interventions to meet multiple objectives, including downstream benefits and local livelihoods potentially. And understanding returns on investment of these nature-based approaches can provide the foundation for targeted policy and finance options. Martino earlier explained really well some of the options that might arise from this kind of information in the case of the Philippines, and a lot of that, I think, applies in Sri Lanka as well. There's the opportunity then to further refine this initial approach with additional information on potential management options, different benefits of interest, including ecosystem services or potential improvements to agricultural production from soil management, as well as more local information on implementation costs for the catchment, and the possibility then to adapt this elsewhere in Sri Lanka. And I'll pass it now, I think, to my colleague Kim, who can talk more about what activities we undertook to really build the expertise within within Sri Lanka, excuse me, to take this forward.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for explaining the technical aspects of the study, and we'll come back to these things later on in the Q&A. So I'll request Kim now to take the floor. Kim is the head of capacity development at the Natural Capital Lab in Stanford. She leads the strategic growth of NatCap's global training and capacity building programs. She has over 25 years of experience in developing these kind of programs. She's worked across continents, across countries. Kim, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Narayan. And thank you, Professor Budi and Lisa, for the great overview and description of the technical analysis. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the capacity development that happened as a part of this project. And as Budi mentioned, a lot of these approaches were fairly new in Sri Lanka. And so a really important aspect of this pilot was really around bringing people together, building awareness, building a common vocabulary to talk about a lot of these different issues and approaches. And so there were a number of different convenings that happened, some forums that happened at the Asian Development Bank, a couple different times at Stanford that really brought people together, as well as in Sri Lanka in different moments, bringing together some key institutions, research institutions, universities, government, really helping people become more aware and knowledgeable about these different approaches and the ways in which they can be integrated into policy at that kind of upstream level that we've been talking about. So in addition to that, as that was happening kind of throughout the entire pilot, one of the things that we identified was the desire to build skills and capacity in natural capital assessments and accounting, building these technical skills. And there's a lot of GIS expertise and skills in different institutions in Sri Lanka. And so we opted to develop a training to orient and build skills around ecosystem modeling and taking those GIS skills, and then how do you apply them to new ways for a lot of people who were coming from water sector, agricultural, and this was for many of them the first time they're really thinking about it from sort of an ecosystem service lens. So this was a really interesting and I think successful training, partly because as this has been I think emphasized all evening, or I guess all morning for many of you, it really involved collaboration and co-development. And so I worked closely with Professor Budi and Lali Suryagoda from University of Peradeniya, and we really co-developed the training. And it also involved selecting participants who had a strong background in GIS and in spatial analysis. So they were ready to really take up the technical aspects of the modeling. So I think that helped the training be successful, and that it was really responsive to the context and deeper knowledge that Budi and Suri had about what's needed, and also the participants gave us a lot of input and feedback into what they needed. So the first piece was around the idea of a natural capital approach and the idea of how you think about ecosystems, their functions and supply to service to value and human well-being, and really thinking about this overall approach and the spatial nature and how you can then put those together in a modeling approach. So then the focus of the training of trainers, and we really thought of it as a training of trainers to really want to enable the participants to then take what they learned and to then share that with their organizations and institutions, in the universities, with their students. And so we had a very engaged and motivated group. And so we focused on 3 different models. We looked at seasonal water yield, related to the important watersheds, and this is an important theme throughout both pilots. Also looking at carbon and looking at tourism. And one of the goals was to start with some of the basic models and really build up people's skills and confidence, so that then they can really carry this forward into the future. As we saw in the Philippines pilot, a lot of the modeling was done by DNR, and so that's the hope that that's the path that Sri Lanka is on, starting to gain those skills in the invest in the modeling to then do some of that themselves. So as I said, we focused on carbon, we focused on seasonal water yield, we looked at recreation model, and participants we had class every other week. And then in the intervening weeks, participants met on their own, and they really had a lot of engagement and peer learning. And I think that was another element of success in this pilot, was peers kind of working with one another. And we had a couple of experienced people in the group. And I think people became very inspired by that feeling of agency over their own learning. And so they worked together in between. So this is kind of a snapshot of some of the models we went through. And we also went over natural capital accounting, which we've gone over some in, Jess went over that a bit previously. And so we discussed how the outputs of some of these models can feed into natural capital accounting and natural capital accounts. And so that was another piece of the training that participants learned. And another aspect was then, well, what do you do with this information? How can you integrate this into policy and finance? So we talked about how the outputs of the assessments and accounting can feed into these decisions. And on the right, I just listed a few different kinds of examples that we talked about with participants, and gave examples from different countries and different places around the world. So I just want to share a little bit about the outcomes, because I think there are some interesting things that and really valuable things that came out of this collaboration. It was a diverse group, primarily from government and academic and research institutions. Like I said, a lot of experience. there was really a sense of increase in knowledge. So on the bottom right hand corner here, there's really a sense of people gaining confidence and knowledge in these different topics that were mostly new to them. And so the last thing I kind of want to point out on this slide here is we ask people before and after kind of their perceptions of their knowledge and confidence. And before the training, the idea that technical skills and capacity was a big challenge was something that came out in the pre-training surveys, but then in the post-training surveys, people seem to feel that that was less of a challenge or a barrier, which speaks to people feeling after the course that, oh, wow, we can do this. We can learn this, we can do this. And so I think that gain in confidence was really important. And then secondly, data availability was something that was brought up a lot throughout the course. But something that happened during the course, which was really important, is this collaboration networking among participants. And they learned about data available at their respective institutions and actually were able to already break down some of those barriers around data sharing and data availability, which is important. And so all of that networking and collaboration and engagement is so important. And I think, as we were saying, it takes time. I think, Abigail, you were mentioning that, and because it's about building trust. And that does take time, and that's really critical. And we saw that as, I think, just as important an outcome of this type of training. And I would say all of the capacity development and engagement and all of these pilots, that collaboration and that trust building is as important and durable as the technical skills and information that come out. After the training, a group has been working with Suri. They've been inspired. I think, Jess, you taught the recreational model, and they were really inspired by the idea that they could access data. And so they've continued on after the training. This is just some initial results that they're carrying it forward on their own, which I think is more than we could hope for, in a sense of being really inspired after the course and having tools to take it forward. So they're hoping to finish this project and hopefully publish the results around visitation in Sri Lanka and recreational values. So then, Budi, I'll turn it back to you just to kind of wrap it up.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
Kim.
Kim.
Yeah,
with
over
your
to you, Budi.
permission. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I don't have any write-ups with respect to slides, but I will have this slide on, and let me try to wind it up from the Sri Lankan point of view, and then hand over the floor to Sanath Ranan, who is seated next to me at this location where we are in Sri Lanka. Well, one important lesson learned out of this whole exercise, we conduct a single pilot, and there was a training program for capacity building. The important thing to understand is so much of capacity has been there. I mean, people's willingness to get involved in this aspect was there, but unfortunately, there was no common platform to get everyone on board and get their interest worked out on this worthy cause. That's the most important thing that we learn, and especially how hungry the Ministry of Finance, for example, with respect to this information. They are looking for information, and that's how the National Planning Department, External Resource Division, and the Ministry of Finance all together decided to support this activity, at least morally, to go ahead with this initial capacity building program, initial pilots, for example, to get the ball rolling in Sri Lanka. And now we see, as Kim said, even the people who took part in this program voluntarily has come forward to use the technologies, to use the techniques that they learn, that they gain more information in order to develop an activity, a project, a research, for example, and come out with an outcome that will benefit the Ministry of Finance and the government of Sri Lanka at the end. So this is an important outcome, important lesson learned, as I told you. We all have started realizing the importance of having this natural capital assessment and accounting. That is the plus factor out of everything that we have gone through. So the way forward. 2 days ago, the Ministry of Finance launched the climate investment, climate financing strategy for Sri Lanka. And in this climate financing strategy, there were 12 thematic areas that have been identified to be supported. And one thematic area out of these 12, mind you, they have initially considered more than 170 areas to be considered for climate financing. But among these 12, natural capital accounting played an important role. A lot of people in the audience, including me, we were able to comment on this and support this activity. So that is a plus alpha of all these activities so that we can see light at the end of the tunnel. For example, that we can move ahead with the support and blessing of the government of Sri Lanka to get this work done in the future. The second important point, as I say, we learn good lessons from Philippine pilots, which have gone into details of activities. Narayan, I think with the support of ADB and the Stanford Natural Capital Project, I think it's important to have this knowledge sharing, a detailed knowledge sharing platform so that Sri Lanka can benefit mostly. And of course, for Philippines, we can give the lessons learned from our end so that we can work together in the future. Not only these two countries, of course, there are other countries I do understand, but there's a lot of similarities and importance between these two countries when we consider the pilots that have completed right now. And the third point, which is the last point that I'm going to mention, is that our experience that we have got through this limited time period is to make sure we'll be focusing more right now, Kim, with your support as well, to have this vertical expansion as well as horizontal expansion, to get more people being trained on this particular subject area. We have trained few as trainers, and we'll utilize them to make sure other government entities, private sector agencies, and more university academia are also coming in with students to get people engaging and to make sure a valid scientific base will be established in the future, so that the Ministry of Finance as well as Government of Sri Lanka can be focusing more with scientifically valid information in their future development plans. Thank you very much, Narayan, for the opportunity given. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Budi. Thanks, Kim, as well. I think it's really heartening to learn that the pilot has played some role in influencing the government's interest in promoting natural capital assessments and accounting, which can only lead to better outcomes in terms of investment in natural capital. So really, really great to see. I think we move on to now taking questions, and I would request my colleague Sanat to moderate this discussion and then take us through to closing the session as well. Over to you, Sanat. Sanat, you're on mute.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me now, Narayan?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Perfect.
okay, great. Okay, thank you very much, Narayan. And firstly, as you said, it has been a very interesting discussion, both on the Philippines and on Sri Lanka. And in fact, I have been, I lost track of time, but I do realize now, looking at the clock, that we are about 10 minutes behind, or even actually about 15 minutes behind schedule. I think it's still important to give at least a few participants an opportunity to ask questions. So I am also down to give closing remarks, and I'm going to kind of reflect a bit on how this work has had bearing on our work at ADB on natural capital. But before I do so, I'll open the floor for maybe one or two questions.
Sanat, I think there are a couple of questions online.
Okay.
Sanat, with your permission, Narayan and Sanat, with your permission, there was a question raised with respect to the initial part of the presentation that I did, and I already responded to it in the chat box. Thank you.
Am I audible, Sanat? Only Krishnan here.
Yes, yes, Suni.
Hi, thanks. I think it was a great opportunity to listen to the presentation. Excellent work done. And literally, we didn't realize how the time flew. So I have two questions. One, basically, to the Philippines as well as the Sri Lankan team. around the issue of data validation and the community involvement, because I think from the beginning, the IRR also looks at some of the aspects of community involvement within the watersheds, including the watershed maintenance groups and of course the others. So especially at the community level. So is there a plan that the data validation part involves some kind of community engagement? The second is basically a bit of a controversial discussion which is currently on around the watersheds vis-a-vis the rapid changes in the climate, especially when there is when we do the natural capital what do you call valuation and accounting, how best we can keep those values at least for a period of time when the governments are in rule. And also there is a great issue around converting a public resource, which is basically water, into a more private resource by doing the watershed development plans. And because when we do the watershed development accounting, for example, the good example that the colleague took on the tea plantations in terms of sediment loads, of course, there are also parallelly, because in some of the states in India, for example, like Assam and all, we do a lot of water harvesting structures in between and also do plantations to restrict the water movement and also to reduce the sediment load. But at the same time, there are also studies that brought up information that the flow of the rivers have been reduced because of the upper catchment capturing the water and restricting the water for agriculture. So that's largely being driven by the rapid changes in climate and of course back-to-back droughts and others. So obviously that's basically going to change the narrative that. So just wanted to flag these two concerns, and it's a great work that you've done, and congratulations team for the very, very good work actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess you had one question, I believe, and one observation, more or less, the one on the valuation and how you convert a public service to a private good is very, yes, indeed, controversial. And I'm not sure if we can get into a discussion on that here. But on your first question on validation of data at a community level, perhaps I could ask Buddhi, because Buddhi is also involved in another initiative here, which I just happen to know of, where there was IMI, International Water Management Institute, did some work of surveys of communities in the upper watersheds, in fact in the same areas. And part of that survey was to try and validate the findings, or maybe at least verify some of these ecosystem services. But Buddhi, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Naya, for that question. This is a very important point. It's a core of all the activities, I must tell you, validation of information. With IMI, University of Peradeniya has got engaged in doing this activity further. There was, a pilot within a pilot has been completed, I must tell you, but we need to expand it further. And that's where University of Peradeniya has come forward to support the efforts of international water management institutes in conducting this study with more manpower involvement from the university itself. And we are cognizant of the fact what you said. I think that is the way forward as well. You may generate certain information, but without validating it at the ground level, it will be very difficult to get an informed decision for future as well. And just to add to what Naya's question, Sanat, all the studies that we have done as pilot were focused on upper Mahaveli watershed. And now we are thinking of moving further in the future to look at the overall watershed as well. The Mahaveli had a focus in Sri Lanka, I must tell you, because of hydroelectricity as well as agriculture, building up livelihood of people. It means a lot to us. But considering the overall watershed becomes important, and that exactly where what Naya's question become really valid. More and more focused studies at the ground level, validation programs are required in order to have go through any future development programs and decision-making efforts. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Buddhi. In the interest of time, let me move to, there was one question in the chat box, and it was a question about whether anyone in this group has done any financial valuation of biodiversity at a organism or site level. And I think perhaps that's a question that someone from the NatCap team can answer, or Martino. Do you have Kim? Do you have a response to that?
I'll say a few things, and then Martino, I'm sure you have a lot of great things to add. I was actually in the middle of writing down just that, yes, although it depends on what kind of values and to whom. So when you're thinking about valuing biodiversity, one way to think about it is, are you thinking about biodiversity for recreational users in a certain place? So you always want to think about whose values are you thinking about? Or are you thinking about biodiversity in terms of maybe a service it provides in terms of um, agricultural yields, or so it's important to be thinking about, we don't value nature. What we look at is the benefits people get from the services provided by nature. So we're not valuing biodiversity per se, we're valuing people's benefits from some service they're getting from biodiversity. So you need to first parse that out, and you could look at a lot of different aspects of what is biodiversity providing. It can even just be existence value. We care, and we care that there's biodiversity. That's real. So those are just a few initial thoughts. But Martino, I'm sure you have things to add there.
No, I agree. I think those are very, very good initial thoughts. I just wanted to add, we did something along this line in the pilot in the Cook Island, where we tried to see what is the value that people attribute to the presence, to the existence of biodiversity in the Murray Lagoon. And we did this with a choice experiment framework, within a choice experiment framework. So I'm not going to get into the detail of this, but exactly, it's not the value of biodiversity, but it's the value that local people and tourists attribute to the presence and the existence of biodiversity. That report is going to be out soon as well, and you can go and have a look.
Thank you, Kim and Martino. So I think Narayan, we're due to stop now, but maybe I can spend maybe 5 minutes to reflect on how all this is being taken
Sanat,
forward.
before that, I think Sanat, Director Claudio would like to add something to the first query.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see that. Yes, please, Director, go ahead.
Narayan, and yes, I would like to respond to the second question and interest about the water resources in the watershed, from the public to the private sector. As I mentioned earlier, we have the ERD BDNR came up with a study recently on the watershed water resources within a watershed estimation, because that should be the first step. We should be able to estimate the water resources in a certain watershed, and of course do some assessment as well. So that's what we did. And we made use of tools, of course, the SWOT and the GIS mapping, a lot of tools. And the manual will come out soon on it. Then we will be also coming up with the study on the water pricing within the watershed. In the Philippines, the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau has what we call the Centers of Excellence. And one of the centers is the Watershed and Water Resources Research and Development Extension Center. And that is the focus of this center to check on the potentials of the watershed, the limitations, etc. But of course, we do it with a lot of agencies, because there are other water regulatory agencies in the country in which we need to work on. So that is the status now in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Director Claudio, for that response. And then I see now there's another question in the chat box. And perhaps it's a question for someone from the NatCap team. Jess, is that question is how the risk of this huge deposit of lahar has been assessed as part of your assessment in the Philippines and the Stowe Thomas?
Well, I think really the people who should be asking that or answering that question are folks in DENR that ran the model. In a nutshell, the presence of lahar sands and how extensive it is a challenge, posed a challenge for us in using this as a pilot watershed for the modeling approach. But to a certain extent, incorporating in information about we were able to parameterize the models to incorporate in the behavior of lahar sands in certainly the sediment models. But I guess my answer to this would be that it's a bit of an anomaly and it was difficult.
I think Director Claudio would like to add to you.
Yes, yes. During the last meeting or workshop with the ADB team and the local consultants, I informed them that there are environmental impact assessment studies done already because, as I said, in that area, the dredging operations also prevail, and so therefore this has to be considered. So I asked them that we can access through the files, records of the DNR Environmental Management Bureau, because the dredging operators go through the Philippine Environmental Impact Statement System, and there are already studies done on it. So, but the reason why I wanted the project to go into this is that the cumulative impact of this has to be studied. Remember, when the proponents go through this, it's on a project basis. Okay, so the cumulative impact after some time has to be assessed, and we hope this project would include or incorporate this, because you see, if we can, if we just talk on the sedimentation, retention of sediment in the area, we should also consider the volume of lahar, which had already been dredged for many years in that area. And the impact even of the lahar to communities, because dredging has been allowed in that area because it already caused flooding. It caused flooding and even had destroyed infrastructure. The good thing is that these dredging operators went through the environmental impact statement system. They secured what we call the environmental compliance certificate. The records are with the Environmental Management Bureau, so we could access this for coming up with a review of this and cumulative impact assessment.
Okay, thank you, Director. Narayan, I think with your permission, maybe we should now move to the closing session since we are behind schedule.
I agree, Sanat. And whatever questions are outstanding, we'll kind of collect them and have them answered by appropriate people.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So in closing, and I won't take too long because I think it's we're behind schedule. I think what I would like to do is reflect on how this Natural Capital Lab pilot work is being taken forward, particularly at ADB. So to put this in context, I would start by mentioning that this Natural Capital Lab, this initiative between ADB and Stanford, is part of what we are sort of broadly calling a three-pronged approach towards a more systematic or more programmatic approach of addressing natural capital. And the Natural Capital Lab plays an important part in doing one of the pillars of this approach. which is doing better assessments, improving our understanding of the links between natural capital and livelihoods, and between the basically of how ecosystem services plays a role in economic and social well-being of people. So the Natural Capital Lab, as you have heard now in the case of the Philippines and in Sri Lanka, has done some interesting assessments, which have then led the respective governments, to move to thinking about investments that would help to address the problems that these assessments have identified. So very tangibly, in the Philippines, the government has made efforts, and ADB is supporting the government to do a policy-based loan right now, a project that is being processed and for approval this year of 400 million, to look at many things around the blue economy. And one area of policy reforms that has been identified is taking the regulation, the PENCAS Act, towards a more implementation phase through developing regulations and guidelines and so on. Plus, there is also a component on a blue economy itself, looking at integrated coastal zone planning and management, and then investments that may lead through policy actions for integrated coastal zone management. Another big investment that's linked to this work, the upstream work that we did through the Natural Capital Lab in the Philippines, is the Integrated Flood Risk Management Program. It's another very large investment of 800 million that is being developed now, and will clearly, benefit from the knowledge and the evidence that was developed through the Natural Capital Lab work in the Philippines. And then a third initiative, which is also taking shape now, is a GEF project to look at biodiversity hotspots and corridors in the Philippines, and the links to the regional flyway, which is also something that the Natural Capital pilot in the Philippines focused on. Moving to Sri Lanka, I'm actually here sitting in the same room with Buddhi, and I'm here because 2 days ago, the government, Buddhi mentioned one moment, very important announcement of this climate financing strategy. Another important milestone for us, for ADB, was that 2 days ago, the government and ADB had its country programming mission. That's the mission that decides the projects for the pipeline for the next coming 3 years. And in this meeting yesterday, 2 days ago, the government and ADB agreed to include an investment in the protection and the management of the upper watersheds of Sri Lanka through a loan that is currently listed in the pipeline in 2028 for $200 million. And so this is really an outcome, I would say, very directly an outcome of the Natural Capital Lab initial pilot work done in Sri Lanka, plus, of course, several other things. UNI is leading a TA, which is also done looking at climate vulnerability in Sri Lanka, which is also showing the importance of upper watersheds. Buddhi very clearly pointed out that Sri Lanka has this precious water tower. Sri Lanka doesn't have glacial melt coming from, snow-capped mountains. They don't have international rivers which feed the country with water. They just have this precious little water tower up in the upper watersheds, a very small area. And ADB alone has invested over $1 billion in downstream irrigation infrastructure to take water from the main river, Mahaveli, to the north central and northwestern province, which are both water scarce. All of these investments, plus all the investments that the country has already made in hydropower, are reliant on a service, ecosystem service, which is water coming down the rivers. And so the importance of watersheds is being highly recognized here. And so this work has really led to very tangible investment opportunities. I think these are the type of opportunities that we were hoping the Natural Capital Lab would yield. Plus, of course, the regional knowledge sharing. I mean, Buddhi alluded to it. There's also a lot of work that ADB has done in China on ecological restoration and ecosystem compensation. And now under the National Capital Lab on gross ecosystem service products, which is natural capital accounting at a macro level. And all of this information can be really valuable to many other countries. So we hope to take this Natural Capital Lab forward, continue the assessments and also the knowledge sharing under this natural capital approach that ADB is now developing. I'll stop here, Narayan, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the team from Stanford University, our colleagues from the ENR, Director Claudia, as well as our ED Justin for giving us their time and sharing their insights. And of course, to all our colleagues and others who joined this session. Thank you very much.